Asa! Hope y'all are having a great day. It's me, Griff Grayman, with Rusalka Games, and I've got a really great craft for you today, and that is these bad boys. Beams, not beams, but posts, wooden posts, with a nice little stone base. And this may not seem like a very exciting craft, but these posts are super quick, and they're elegant, and they have a surprising amount of versatility and modularity to them. And we'll go over some of the things that we can do with them on our game table after we go through the craft. But in the meantime, suffice to say that Reinhardt here finds them very useful to hold up the second floor of his public house and keep that 1,000-pound still of hot beer from spilling everywhere. So let's jump into things. We're going to start by making our posts out of XPS foam. And these ones I actually cut using a Proxxon table, but you definitely don't need one. My sample post here was made by hand. So if you have a Proxxon table, you're probably familiar. I basically cut 1 inch by 1 inch rectangular prism and then cut it into sections about 4 inches long. Just like I do for most crafts, I take some existing pieces I have, or I take some miniatures I'm working with, and I compare them for scale, and usually then I build my scale based on a previous piece, and I try to pull measurements and have them in common, because you just find that really helps the modularity of your set. So if you are cutting by hand, the easiest way to get nice rectangular prisms is to just start with the thickness of your foam. In this case, I've got a 1 inch piece of foam board here. And so I will cut 1 inch wide a strip or a rectangular prism to create, so I've got square dimensions in 2 dimensions already. So I'll just kind of mark that off here in a few spots. And then take my straight edge, and it's important to know that the line you're starting with is square. So now I'll mark that out, and if you are cutting by hand, use a utility knife. Make sure your blade is sharp, or at least pretty fresh, and you make consecutive cuts, steadying yourself with your other fingers. And suffice to say, be careful when you're using a knife. So if you're pretty slick with it, 3 passes is probably enough to just about do it. Okay, so now I've got this nice rod, and I'm just going to go off of my previous piece in order to make my measurements. Mark that off. Do a couple more of those. I don't worry too much about making things exactly precise, because that's what 3D printing is for. I don't know. Okay, and again, come in here, just try to make a nice even cut on top, because you want to have that face be nice and smooth for when we do some of our detail work later on. Okay, there we go. Just like that, we've got 5 fresh little columns here. And they're not perfectly square and perpendicular on all their faces, so what we can do is come along with our sanding sponge and just kind of make up the difference a little bit. Kind of square off these sides and kind of make the texture uniform in case these pieces are a little scratched or scuffed from before. Okay, and with that we should have a good enough post. Remember when you're crafting not to let an over-attention to precision impede your creative process. it can be tempting to get caught up in perfectionism and want to be really obsessed with making straight and even lines. Things that are handmade don't really have straight and even lines, and their faces aren't perpendicular, and they're not perfect squares, and in fact, a perfect square doesn't exist nowhere but in the realm of the forms. And when we pull our craft out of the realm of the forms and into reality, part of the price we pay for that is the imperfections. But the piece that exists is better than the piece that doesn't exist. So just think about that when you're crafting. So I've got my post, and now I'm going to start to do a little bit of the detail work to get my textures. So for this, I use a thin pen. It's a Zebra, but you could use any pen, or you could even use like a pencil, conceivably. And what we first want to do is go around the bottom near the base and create our little stone foundation for these pillars. So I'm just going to kind of run eyeball even on an even plane with the bottom face of this pillar and create this little cap all the way around. And, you know, don't be afraid to go a little deep. And if you make a little mistake, a little crease like I did there, leave it, because it's going to add flavor to your piece later that you can work in. So once I've got this little cap going on, I will go up another course here, do a similar, maybe even a slightly thinner course. And so now I've got two little courses there. And I'm just going to go down here, and the first course I'm going to bisect. Actually, the second course I'm going to bisect, and then the first course I'm going to further bisect. So I'll just go like that on the first course, and then cut that on both sides for the second course in order to make my brickwork. And then I'll go in and kind of trace around the corners to kind of round things out a little bit. And this is where, if the spirit moves me, I might even add other little details at this time, but this is plenty to get the effect we're going for. So I'll just do that on each side. One down the middle, and a couple on either side. And again. And then if it looks too square, let's come in and rough it up a little bit. This is, I don't know about your world, but in my world there's not a lot of really fine craftsmanship. My world is on the frontier, so people are not just lifelong masons and builders. They've got to do everything, so they can't focus so much attention on making these majestic, palatial things. Everything's kind of crude, and so that fits with my skill level, and it fits with my setting. Okay, good. So here we go. Now we've got this nice stone base to start out with. We're going to do detail on the wood grain for the beams. And basically to do this, we're just going to, you could use a wire brush, and you could really quickly get a wood grain, and that's a nice thing to do with some foam work. But for this, I think you get a much better, more exaggerated, more kind of pronounced wood grain texture, and it just is better for this piece. So to start, we're going to put some knots in the wood, and you just look at your piece and let your third eye, or let your kind of internal aesthetic sensibility tell you where the knot should be. What should it look like? What doesn't it look like? And so usually I'll put maybe 2, maybe 3 knots on a side. And then I just trace down from the top, and I use my finger sort of as a guide, my ring finger here, to make straight lines down the length of the beam. And the nice thing is, because we're doing an organic meets geometrical shape here, if you're not perfectly straight, that's actually going to be just fine. It's going to add to the look. So you're going to trace down, and when you hit a knot, you're just going to kind of go around it. like so. Oop, I got close to a knot, I went around it. And then in this case I'm going to add just a little bit of filler grain detail right there. And then on the next thing down, you want to kind of trace that previous deviation and sort of smooth it out so that we are approaching a straight shot again. And there we go. Now we're back to a straight shot. And we're going to approach a knot again. Again, we'll just trace right around it, get back to going parallel, and then trace around again. And if it looks like we need a little extra detail in there, we can add it. And trace around, kind of smooth out that bump, and then one more to cap it off. And there we go. Now you've got this interesting knotty wood texture, and we're just going to do that for the rest of the sides. Again, this time I'm feeling like there's going to be a really big knot on this side. So there's one really big knot and then one small one down here. Just 2 knots on this one. And I'm going to trace down. And I'm going to work around that knot. And I'm going to smooth out that little bevel. And work around that big knot, bring it back to the middle. Okay, and there we go. There's our next side. Oh shit. Okay, I did the grandpa move and had the camera recording and not recording in the wrong sequence there. But for the bottom, we just glue a little square piece of like foam core board foam, like presentation board foam. This is that dollar store foam everybody talks about. And because my post was about 1 inch by inch, I made my little foam square about 1.25 inches by 1.25 inches. And I just stuck that on there with some hot glue, and then came along and opposed to the previous, line in the brickwork, you just bisect that and again get this nice little brick pattern like so. Okay, so now we're going to take our Blackmagic juice a la Jeremy and Blackmagic Craft, which is Mod Podge and black paint, and we're going to paint on all the surfaces of this foam, especially taking care to get it in the joints where we've joined the 2 foams with hot glue in order to seal everything up. And this is why you really shouldn't be afraid at this stage to give a lot of deep detail on this kind of work, because it's going to be partially drunk up by laying this this magic juice over it, this Mod Podge sealant. So I'll give you just a little look into my technique. Whenever I'm going with detail work, I want to go with the grain, so to speak. So when I'm up here working on this face with the wood, I'm going to kind of sweep in with the grain there, and then when I'm down working on the stonework, I'm going to go along the brickwork course. And don't be afraid to really slop it on in some spots, and once you get it down into the grooves, you can, bring your brush out and transfer paint as needed to another spot. But this stuff is pretty heavy, and it has kind of a texture of its own if you're not careful, so you don't want to lay it on too thick, or you want to be able to thin it out later. Unless in some spots you're wanting to fill a gap, in which case you can think about what you're doing more like sculpting than like painting. You're really laying on kind of a liquid medium or a semi-liquid medium, and you can kind of use it and pull it up. It's got really nice adhesive properties. It wants to stick to other surfaces really well, so you can kind of pull it up in these cracks and areas where you need to fill in some gaps a little bit. Otherwise, come in here and really lift it out of the spots that you want to see the detail work, and in the end when it dries, it is going to suck down and it is going to reveal a lot of that detail again. So it's just something to keep in mind, and I'm sure that you guys do, but always kind of watch and see how your materials are behaving, because if you learn their behaviors, then you can really work better with your medium as friend, as opposed to something you just scrape and chew into submission. Okay, so I've got that post all nice and coated, and while that is drying, I am going to experiment with another type of column here. I'm going for more of like a Roman or Greek sort of carved marble or stone column, and this one is actually even simpler. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to, because I know how not only materials behave, but how my materials behave, how they play with each other. And I'm using a big thick Sharpie and my XPS foam, and I'm going to make I'm going to make 4 lines on each face here, and I'm really going to press hard. And not only is that going to indent my foam a little bit, but this is also going to sort of eat or compress my foam further and give me a nice smooth kind of divot out of this foam. So yeah, really pressing down in there with a nice broad Sharpie. I'm going to kind of use my ring finger as a bit of a guide to try to get a straighter cut. I'm going to do my best, even though these are thick lines, to fit 4 of these in here. Okay, see? Getting that. And what this is going to do is this is going to give me this nice kind of carved out texture that you see in these marble columns. Ooh, I'm running out of space on this one. I'm just going to do this for each side. Okay, so I've done this to all 4 sides, and as you can see here, it really, really creates that kind of concave rib going down this column. And so I'm going to take a few more of my little pre-made foam core or foam board pieces and just glue these guys on. And yeah, see, I used way too much glue there, getting all this spill over. And I kind of know how long it takes my glue to cool down, so I'm not afraid to go ahead and just give that a swipe and kind of distribute the heat out over my fingers. And I don't know whether I think it's better to, glue the surface that's receiving or the surface that's being tacked on. Seems to kind of change. I don't know if I've figured out what my preference is there. Okay, I'm going to hold that in, so try to square things off. Again, I've got a good amount of splooge, so I'm just going to wipe it off there. Don't do that if you think you're going to burn yourself. Not recommending burning yourself. Okay, so I've got this now. It's kind of, the look's getting there, but it's not quite right. Something is off. Doesn't have this nice taper to the top of these the caps on these columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my utility knife and I'm going to come in and hit here on the deep end and then kind of cut a bevel in towards my pillar. Being careful not to apply too much force, so I cut down past and cut into the pillar itself. But I'm going to do this on all the faces. Okay, and so now see I've got this really nice shape going on the top and bottom that just kind of fleshes that really simple column out a little bit. And so I'm going to hit this one also with the Blackmagic Juice, the goop. Okay, so now my layers are dry, and I'm going to start painting. And I'm going to start with a little bit of this kind of nutmeg light brown. Squirt a little bit of that little juice on there. And also a little line of black. And of course some white. These are just kind of my base colors I'm gonna go for. And I am using kind of a blunt square brush. Guess I'll start with mixing up a gray for my base layer for my stonework. And I'll go pretty dark. So if you can see, yeah, here's my gray that I'm working with to start. I'm gonna kind of just give that some quick dry brushes on. Don't need very much paint on here, and you don't need to cover it fully. You can leave a lot of bare spots where the black shows from underneath. And if you get up into the wood a little bit, that's okay. But that's how I would do my first base there. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to do my stone column in the essentially the same color. And I just mix my white and black right here together. And just kind of keep a little living palette, add a little bit of water if I really need to, just to keep things flowing well. And I'll come here with my column. And I don't like to go precisely with or precisely against the grain when I'm doing my dry brush, because you'll get a strange look either way. You'll be kind of either working too hard against or working too hard with your sort of your existing lines. So I hit those at maybe like a 30-degree angle or something like that. Okay, there's our first kind of impressions. And because your brush is so dry, you can pretty quickly hit it again. Just take a little bit of white, mix it in there to your kind of living blend of color, dry it out a bit, maybe thin it just a little bit with some water, and then we hit again, just pretty light. And you're just kissing it. What you're doing when you're dry brushing is you're simulating sunlight or whatever light source is. It's gonna not get to the deep spots as much, and it's gonna get more so to the light spots. That's where it's gonna be, or the raised spots, that's where it's gonna be light. I'm just gonna go ahead, I hit this one, I'm just gonna mix in a little more white and hit it again. Oh yeah, there we're starting to get some definition. There we go. See that coming to life? Gonna do the same thing, hitting my columns here. Okay, you see this is really coming along. And now I'm gonna go off from my white. I've still got this gray on my brush, mind you, so we're gonna get a little bit of blend here of that darker color, but I'm just gonna go basically straight white with the remainder of the gray that I've got, and do that last little highlight coat. Just drag it across. That last little bit of detail, highlight. Okay, that'll do it, and that's basically good to go now. And I'll do this one, I might do along the grain, that last hit of white on there as well. And it doesn't have to be uniform all across, because your light source wouldn't be uniform either. You can kind of hit it heavier in some areas than others. But when I'm done, I am going to give it a pretty heavy hit on top, because that's going to get a lot of light, obviously, and it's going to make the other spots pop. Okay. So here's our little stone column. And here's our wood. Now I'm going to go ahead and go straight into the brown without cleaning my brush. That color gets drunk up pretty nicely and just blends into our brown, maybe gives it a little more character. Dry that off a bit. And again, I'm going to go not strictly with and not strictly against my my grain. And you're really wanting to hit kind of high up on the brush, so you're not even using the end of it. Try to get a better detail shot of that. And really, now that I'm looking at it, you could have done even a darker brown for your base coat. Or I could have done. You can still do. Okay, so I could let this this wooden post dry and give it, mix in a little white, a little yellow, a little red, get a little bit of more of a burnt sienna or a little orangish tone to kind of do highlights on my post. But just for the sake of expedience here, I'm just going to mix a little bit of white in and get kind of this dull lighter brown and hit this in a few spots. Okay. And there you have it. Okay, so now we've got these great posts or columns if you did the column variety. But what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it in your game? Well, obviously they can just exist as terrain, things to duck behind in a bar fight, to, steer clear of the flying mug or stein. But you can also use them and set rules for your world that, some familiar objects, because if you went to the trouble of crafting these, you want to be able to use them over and over again. And the more the players can learn about the consistencies of your environment, that's helpful for them to feel empowered to exist and know the little treats in your world and little, destructible bits, so to speak. So you might just introduce a mechanic one night in your game that says that, these pillars that you would see in a tavern are destructible. Or you might give a hint that one of them looks really rotted out. You can tell it's got significant termite damage, so that when your players are in here and they can hear creaking footsteps upstairs of somebody that they're after, you can, do some damage to a beam and cause the roof to come tumbling in and deal falling damage or cause an evasion action for your players. You can also use these to really enhance the kind of seriousness or to punctuate other set pieces. Like oftentimes I'll have a simple thing like a gate, and if I stick two little columns right near it, little beams, it makes for a lot more imposing of an edifice there. But there's tons of ways that you can incorporate these into your game and really add just another neat little vertical element to your maps.
Mr. Reinhardt, where are you? Have you been sneaking again?